1 year in, and we are back now with the panel. Marie, start us off on this, because Joe Biden this week is going to try to recover from his version of Alexander's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week. When he sums up a year of accomplishments in the preamble to his press conference on Wednesday, is he going to have much to point to? Because it seems that the one big accomplishment of his administration was a bipartisan effort on infrastructure, and that all of the partisan things that he's tried to get done have failed.
Well, John, I think this press conference is important to start. I think it'll be an important day for reporters to ask him questions. But there's good economic news in many ways. I mentioned the low, the biggest year for job creation in American history, these unemployment rates. Inflation actually now starting to tick down a little bit. And he's also going to talk about, without taking a victory lap, right, some of the COVID success. So many shots in arms. The fact that so many more people now are vaccinated and boosted and therefore surviving COVID, right? This is a long fight against COVID. But he has to also lay out a proactive agenda for the future. He has to say, and we'll hear that again in the State of the Union, but he has to say, here's how we're going to keep fighting Omicron. Here's how we're going to get this, the economy growing even more, get this inflation under control. And here's how I'm going to work with Congress to do that. So he has a lot of agenda items he needs to address in this press conference.
Josh, you want to respond to that? I mean, particularly on the issue of COVID, with all respect to Marie, I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah, I think there's a cold, hard wind of reality that's blowing in the face of this administration when it comes to trying to sell just about anything that we just heard. I mean, look, I think the reality is that everybody knows that Joe Biden was elected president in large part because he convinced the American people that you could fix COVID if you change the occupant of the Oval Office. Yeah. That has not happened. By any statistical measurement, we are in a worse place. Made worse, I think, by this administration seeming to not focus on it at all, right? I mean, this is a week where he traveled to Atlanta to make a quote-unquote voting rights speech while you've got empty shelves, rising inflation, COVID everywhere, all of these problems that are uniquely affecting the American people. He seems radically out of touch, and I think his poll numbers reflect that.
Yeah, he made that strident voting rights speech only to come back to Washington, D.C. and have Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin say, not going to happen. Chad, give us your learned analysis here, because we want to put up this Quinnipiac poll, which is really dismal, from last week. President Biden's overall approval rating, 33%. The economy, 34%. Foreign policy, 35%. Coronavirus, which was his strong suit, 39%. He's so far underwater, he's got to be breathing nitrox.
They are really victims here, the White House is and the president is, of overpromising and under-delivering. You want to always do the opposite in politics, and that's not happened. That's not what happened with the voting rights bill and the filibuster this past week. It kind of reminds me, when you get into Build Back Better, of what the Republicans did for years, 2010, 2012. We're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. Repeal and replace Obamacare. They never quite got there. This is the problem for Democrats when they said we're going to pass Build Back Better and change the filibuster and make D.C. and Puerto Rico states. None of those things have happened, and this is why you have the left wing of their base very upset.
Yeah, there was a real head-scratcher last week, Marie, when Kamala Harris sat down with Craig Melvin of the Today Show for an interview, and she seemed to fold up like a cheap suit at even the most mildest challenge. Listen here.
6 former administration officials last week wrote that open letter urging the administration to change course, to change strategy. Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree that there are things and tools that are available to us to slow this thing down.
Marie, what did you make of that, and what does it portend for the future?
Yeah, administrations never like to admit that they need to change course, even though some of them often do. And that's not an indictment of everyone who's working or all the things that they've tried to achieve. And so I do think that this White House will look at this next year, two, and hopefully will say, okay, maybe we don't need to change everything, but we need to double down on making the case to the American people about what we've achieved and how that's impacted their actual lives. I think they're a little bit scared of their left and the right flanks, quite frankly. I think they know what they want to accomplish, but sometimes they talking point it too much. They don't want to cause waves. They just want to go down the middle. And you know what? when you're in a pandemic and you have these crises, sometimes you have to make waves. And so I hope they do that more.
Josh, how did you view that? Was that just an administration official who didn't want to admit that they need to make a change, or was that someone who appeared to be wholly unprepared for an interview? She didn't have statistics, she didn't have figures, she didn't have timelines.
Yeah, I think it's the latter, John. And this is basically the problem that we've seen from Vice President Harris since the very beginning of this administration. When she does these interviews, there's not a message that she's pushing. There's not a strategy that she's trying to articulate. She's basically trying to survive the interview. And so it begs the question, if the Vice President of the United States has no idea what the strategy of this administration is when it comes to things like COVID, who does, right? I mean, I haven't heard much out of the president either. And so I think they've got a more fundamental problem than switching tactics or anything like that. I think they don't have any clue what they're doing at this point.
Chad, give us a quick read on the week ahead. We've got the press conference on Wednesday. Chuck Schumer is also going to try to go back to the well on filibuster reform. What are we looking at in the next few days?
Well, they're going to try to move this voting rights bill. That's not going to happen. They need 60 votes there. This will tee up a prospective vote to change the filibuster. That's not going to happen. Now, whether or not Chuck Schumer goes all the way through with that failed procedural vote, a nuclear option, as we would call it, kind of what happened in 2013 and 2017, remains to be seen, because what he's essentially doing here, John, is he is weaponizing that vote against members of his own party, Sinema and Manchin. Usually you set up these votes to hit the other side. It's rare to do that so that you are applying pressure on them. And heretofore, they don't look like they're willing to move.
Yeah, I mean, based on what Sinema and Manchin said last week, it doesn't look like they're willing to say, oh, you know what, we were wrong. Let's blow up the filibuster for voting rights. Panel, it's great to have spent time with you this morning. Josh, Chad, Marie, we'll see you again very soon. Appreciate it. Coming up next.